The bell above the door at Coyle's barbershop had rung the same way for 39 years. A small brass note, worn smooth by thousands of hands pushing through on cold mornings and hot afternoons. Nathaniel Coyle knew that sound the way other men knew their own heartbeat. He'd hung the bell himself the week he opened the shop, back when Ashford Creek still had a feed store on Main Street, and the traffic light on Route 9 was the only one for 20 miles. Nate was 61 now, broad through the shoulders, in the way of a man who had stood on his feet his whole working life. His hands moved with the unthinking precision of habit. Comb, scissors, comb, a half turn of the chair, scissors again. He wore the same style of white barber's coat his father had worn, though his father had cut hair in a different town, in a different decade, before dying with almost nothing to leave behind. That was a fact Nate carried with him quietly, the way a man carries an old scar. It didn't hurt anymore, it just reminded him. The shop itself hadn't changed much in 39 years. The same checkerboard floor tile, a little more worn near the first chair than the second. The same mirror running the length of the far wall, spotted now at the corners with age. A row of clippers hung on the wall like tools in a workshop, oiled and cared for, the way a craftsman cares for anything that earns his living. Customers joked that time seemed to stand still inside Coyle's barbershop, that a man could walk in as a boy and walk out, decades later, still recognizing every corner of the place. Nate liked that about the shop. He liked that some things could stay exactly as they were while everything around them changed. The shop had 2 chairs, though Nate only ever used one. The other belonged in name to whichever young barber was passing through Ashford Creek, trying to save up for a shop of their own. There had been 6 of them over the years, and Nate had taught everyone the same thing his father never got to teach him: how to save. "You don't get rich from the register," he'd say, snipping at the collar of some farmer's son. "You get rich from what you don't spend." Most of them laughed it off. Barbering wasn't a rich man's trade. It was a living, a decent one if you worked hard. But nobody in Ashford Creek was driving up in anything nicer than a used pickup because they cut hair for a living. Nate didn't argue the point. He just kept doing what he'd been doing since 1987, the year he opened the shop with borrowed money and a single pair of shears that had belonged to his father. Every Friday, after the last customer left and the register was counted, Nate sat at the small desk in the back room, the same one scarred with cigarette burns from a previous owner of the building, and he wrote numbers into a ledger. Not fancy numbers, simple ones. The week's take, the rent, the supplies. And at the bottom, in the same careful hand every time, the amount he was setting aside. It was never much. Some weeks, it was $40. Some weeks, when a bill came due, it was nothing at all. But the ledger went back to a rule Nate had made with himself the day he opened the shop. A rule that had nothing to do. His father had cut hair for 34 years in a mill town 2 hours north and had done it well, and had never once, in all that time, put a dollar anywhere it could grow. When he died, there was a shop full of paid-off equipment and $400 in a coffee can. That was the whole estate. Nate was 22 at the time, and he remembered standing in the empty shop after the funeral, running his hand along the counter his father had built, and understanding something that most young men don't understand until it's too late. Hard work and money are not the same thing. A man could work himself to the bone and still leave nothing behind if he never once let a dollar work for him instead of the other way around. The barbering and everything to do with what he'd watched happen to his father. So when Nate opened his own shop 5 years later, he made himself a promise. Whatever the shop earned above what he needed to live modestly, he would not spend. He would set it into something that grew, a low-cost index fund, on the advice of an accountant customer who came in every 3rd Tuesday and talked, unprompted, about compound growth the way other men talked about fishing. The accountant's name was Walter Ferris, and he had a habit of drawing little diagrams on the back of receipts while Nate cut his hair, showing how a small amount left untouched could double and then double again. given enough time. Nate hadn't understood half of what the man said at first, but he understood the shape of the idea. Money left alone, growing quietly, faster over time, the way a small stream cuts a canyon, given enough centuries. He started with $30 a week. It felt like nothing. It was nothing. Some weeks, next to the rent, and the blades, and the heating room. But Nate did not stop. Even in 1991, when the recession hit and half of Ashford Creek's storefronts sat empty, he found $19 some weeks and put it in anyway. Even in 2001, when a doctor found a shadow in his lung that turned out, thank God, to be nothing, and the medical bills piled up regardless, Nate kept the contribution going. Smaller some months, but never zero. Even in 2008, when the number in his statement dropped by nearly half in the space of a year and his hand shook a little turning to that page, he did not sell. He remembered the accountant's voice, calm as ever. The third Tuesday after the crash. The market's on sale, Nate. You don't sell your best asset because the price dropped. You buy more if you can. Nate bought more. Not much. He never had much. But he didn't stop. 39 years is a long time to do anything quietly. Long enough for a town to change around a man without him quite noticing the shape of the change. Until he looked up one day and the feed store was a coffee shop. And the traffic light on Route 9 had been joined by two more. And the boy whose first haircut Nate gave in 1988 was bringing in a son of his own, holding the boy's hand the same nervous way his own father once had. Long enough too, for a small pile of unremarkable numbers to become something else entirely. The townspeople who came through Coyle's barbershop over the decades knew Nate as a fixture, as reliable as the church bell on Sunday mornings or the diner's early opening hour. They knew he opened at 6 and closed at 6, that he never took more than a week's vacation, and that he asked after every customer's family by name, remembering birthdays and graduations, and the small griefs of small-town life better than most people remembered their own. What none of them knew, what none of them could have guessed from the modest shop or the modest man behind the chair, was the quiet arithmetic running underneath all of it, year after year, patient as the seasons. Nate never told anyone the size of it, not the men in his chair, not the young barbers he trained, not even, for many years, his daughter Ruth, who worried sometimes that her father worked too hard for a man his age and should think about slowing down. "You'll be fine, Dad," she'd say. "You don't have to keep killing yourself in that shop." "I like the shop," he'd tell her, which was true, but was not the reason he kept going in every morning at 6. The reason came out only when Nate turned 61 and decided at last to close the shop and hand the second chair, and eventually the whole building, to Marcus, the last of his 6 young barbers, a serious kid from 2 towns over who reminded Nate of himself at that age. Careful with a blade, careless with his own future. Before he handed over the keys, Nate sat Marcus down at the same scarred desk in the back room and opened the ledger. Not the weekly numbers this time, but the summary page at the very back, the one he updated once a year in early January, in the same careful hand. Marcus looked at the number for a long moment, without saying anything. $2,300,000. "That's not shop money," Marcus finally said. "No," Nate agreed. Shop money bought the blades and paid Ruth's college tuition and kept the lights on through some lean Januaries. This is something else. This is 39 years of not spending what I didn't need. Put somewhere it could grow while I wasn't looking at it too closely. I don't understand how a barbershop turns into $2 million. It doesn't, Nate said. A barbershop turns into a living. This turned into $2 million because I left it alone long enough for math to do what math does. Compound growth doesn't care that I cut hair for a living. It doesn't check what's on your business card. It just needs time, and it needs you not to interrupt it. He closed the ledger and slid it, along with the shears his father had left him, across the desk. "I'm not telling you to be a barber your whole life if it's not what you want," Nate said. "I'm telling you, whatever you end up doing, decide now what you won't spend, and don't argue with yourself about it every week. The deciding is the hard part. After that, it's just patience. Mark has kept the shop. He kept the second chair empty for young barbers of his own, the way Nate had. And on the wall behind the register, where customers could see it if they looked, he hung a small brass bell that no longer rang above any door. Just Nate's original bell. It read simply. 39 years. He never once explained himself. He didn't need to. Retired, mounted like a keepsake, with a short engraved plate beneath it. Mark has also kept the ledger in a drawer beneath the register, though he started his own beside it, in his own careful hand. The same simple columns, the same quiet arithmetic. Some evenings after closing, he would sit at that same scarred desk and think about how strange it was that the most important lesson he'd ever been taught had come, not from a classroom or a bank, but from a man with scissors in his hand, who never once raised his voice about money, only about patience. Ashford Creek never did find out about the $2,300,000. Not really, not until Ruth, years later, mentioned it once at her father's funeral, almost as an aside to a group of townspeople who had known Nate Coyle only as the quiet man who cut their hair and asked about their families, and never once, in 39 years, complained about anything at all. They were more surprised by the number than by anything else they learned that day. But the ones who'd sat in his chair long enough understood, in hindsight, that he'd been telling them the whole time. Every Friday. In a ledger they never got to see. And in 6 words, he said to every young barber who ever passed through his shop, "You don't get rich from the register." He just never told them what he got rich from. Instead, he let the numbers do that quietly for 39 years while he kept his head down and did the work.